Live.
All right, guys, welcome into the Alabama Postgame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. I'm Simone Eli along Matt Scalisi. Trying to catch our breath right now after this one. What a game. One that will not be soon forgotten by really anybody in college football, but definitely Alabama fans as the Tide fall 41-38 to Texas A&M. The final score, the Aggies kick a field goal as time expires to win the game. A huge upset win for Jimbo Fisher at the Aggies. They take the field. It's crazy. I mean, Jimbo's the first former Saban assistant to beat Nick Saban. I mean, so many storylines, Matt. It's hard to even pick one to roll with to start. But I think what we have to discuss is what does this mean for Alabama moving forward?
Yeah, well, it is the end of a lot of streaks, which I think, even though it's obviously disappointing and a negative moment for the program, it's also, I think, worth remembering that the streaks are ending because they were incredibly long to begin with. No one else has really ever accomplished what Alabama has done over the last couple of years. But, I think there were signs that this was coming, and we can talk about that later. In terms of what it means in the immediate future, it's been so long since Alabama fans have had to deal with a loss. I think it's hard to remember the implications of it. I think all Alabama fans kind of know to do in this situation is to say, well, that's it. We can't meet our goals this year. Really not true. And even more so in this case than in many of the other losses that Alabama has had. Not that there's not that very many of them in the last 10 years, but in this particular case, you're talking about a loss to a two-loss team, a team that has already lost 2 SEC games. So for Texas A&M, while this is a big moment for their program and it is a huge achievement individually, it doesn't really put them in a particularly great spot to win the SEC West. Alabama still perfectly capable of accomplishing that by winning out the rest of their games. Now, it reduces their margin of error for sure.
Yeah.
And I think we can talk about what problems were revealed about this team over the course of this game, if they were. But how it impacts this team, this has been a crazy season in college football. The top 4 are teams that we don't, other than Georgia, they're teams that we don't really see up there very much because a lot of the traditional powers have already been knocked off and are not looking invincible. So I don't think this has too much of an effect at all on Alabama's chances of making the playoffs, which, as we know, is their ultimate goal. But it doesn't particularly even hurt them in the race to win the SEC West. So kind of a unique situation here.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I mean, like you said, a lot of moving parts. At the end of the day, every goal that Alabama wants to achieve still lies ahead and is really still entirely in their control. All it takes is just continuing to beat teams in the SEC West, win the West, and move forward into postseason play. So in that regard, no reason to hit the panic button necessarily, but of course our comments are blowing up. People are frustrated with things on both sides of the ball, and we can pick apart all of that. At the end of the day, you said a minute ago, Nick Saban knew that this team was not delivering the way he wanted them to deliver. And it's like he harped and he harped and he harped. And we sat here in the media and the fans and probably some of the players. And we're like, well, good Lord, coach, like what else do you want to see from this team? They're dominating on both sides. The games get boring. It is what it is. Even I had the mentality, I think a lot of Bama fans did throughout the night where, okay, Alabama was messing around a little bit with Texas A&M. We're going to get into the third quarter, and Bama's going to win by 21, and Saban's going to have something to complain about for the next month, get us through the regular season, and that's what it's going to be, and that's not what it was. And it's like, okay, tip your cap to the greatest coach ever in college football because he knew something was coming, and it came.
I think he's definitely expressed some concerns before this week. He did mention it this week, and he said he called this a trap game. He thought that perhaps this was catching his team at a really rough time. But I think Saban has had some inkling for a while that this team really wasn't playing with the level of intensity that they were capable of, but also needed to play with in order to win all of these games. And he talked a little bit about it in his post-game press conference. He said, this division that we play in is just too good. There's too many talented players that play for our opponents for us to not take it deadly seriously every single week. But I think the one thing that he mentioned tonight that rings a bell that he's been sort of saying all offseason is, he said, I want everybody to remember what this feels like. And I think he's had this concern for a while now that Alabama as a program, beyond just even the players, these players for sure, but the fans too,
sure,
that they don't appreciate. And I'm not saying you're being ungrateful. It's not about that. They don't have the idea in their head of what it feels like to lose, of what it even feels like for it to be possible for this team to lose. And I think that has an effect on you. I think it affects the level of intensity that you play with, prepare with, study with, all of it. And I think he's been concerned about that aspect of his program for some time now. And you can tell he's hoping to turn this into an opportunity for the program to refocus and approach things with a different level of intensity than they have been so far.
Yeah. Let's break things down a little bit more X's and O's, and let's talk the defense first, because it seems as though that's the frustrating point. And giving up 41 to an Aggies team who has done absolutely nothing offensively for the most part all season is very, very frustrating. Zach Calzada looked like a Heisman candidate in the beginning of this game. Dude completed the first 10 or 11 passes and then, the interception or whatever. But he was 21 of 31 for 285 and 3 touchdowns. Now, I understand that Bama lost Malachi Moore early in the game. I mean, that was a difficult situation because the targeting rule, we can get into that another day. It's difficult, but it's called. You know what I'm saying? It's something you have to deal with. I was very surprised to see it in this situation. Malachi Moore is out. That absolutely hurt this Alabama defense, but there were times where they just straight looked lost, not only in the secondary, but even more importantly, up front. I mean, A&M was gashing that behind whenever they wanted to throughout the entire game, but definitely in the first half. I mean, there was no ability to stop the run. I mean, Texas A&M, it was literally like, I was sitting there thinking, it's like they swapped jerseys and this game is being played right now. Like that's how confused I was by this situation.
I think it certainly looked that way in the first half. And honestly, pretty impressive that Alabama's defense came out and played the second half the way that they did. The last drive, Texas A&M did what they needed to do. But that first half of that game, I do think some of it was a great game plan by Jimbo Fisher. I think some of it was Alabama's defensive players having some of the same issues they've had all season. They have had issues getting lined up correctly, reading the play correctly. We saw at various moments, 2 guys filling the same gap. We know that's not supposed to happen. I think there are still issues with this team getting it and being on the same page defensively. But again, saw some improvement in the second half. The other part of this that you can't account for, though, Zach Calzada came out here, and I mean, this is a guy that absolutely nobody took seriously.
No.
And I'll count myself in that number. This dude just did the thing that you kind of have to do when you're the team that beats Alabama every so often, which is he had an unbelievable game. He was, look, you can criticize Alabama's defense all you want, and they deserve it, but Zach Calzada made really tough throws all night. He was executing at an extremely high level, and sometimes guys do that. Sometimes guys have an out of their mind game, and you have to do it to beat Alabama. Yeah. He didn't particularly play great in the second half until that final drive when he sort of found it within himself again. But credit to Zach Calzada. It was a legitimately great performance from him.
Yes.
And yes, did he take advantage of Alabama's defense not playing their best game and having confusion all night? For sure he did. But I also think we cannot just discount this and say Alabama's defense made Zach Calzada look good. Both things can be true, and I think they both happened tonight.
Yeah, I mean, Julie Sebastian here in the comments, he knew the assignment. If you're a big TikTok person, you understand what that means, but he absolutely did. And he delivered. And here's the thing, Matt, here's the thing, and we know this about being like the king of the hill like Alabama is. You're going to get everybody's best game. Nick Saban knows that. The folks that have been successful at Alabama with Nick Saban know that. That is why he tries to get his teams to prepare in the best possible way they can week in and week out. Because when you are at the top, everyone is going to bring you their best effort from other head coaches, assistant coaches, for definitely former assistants looking to finally get a win over Nick Saban, Zach Calzada, you name it. They are playing with it. I got nothing to lose mentality. We're at home. We've lost our 2 first conference games. We stand no chance. Let's just go out there and ball out. And that's exactly what they did. And when you are the king of the hill, when you are Alabama, you have to bring your A game because teams are dying to take you down.
I think for sure this team was, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of things like this that folks sort of looking for the positive side, which I appreciate, but I think this probably was coming at some point. I think that this team was not going to reach the next level, was not going to advance until they got a proper scare put in them. And, look, it's still up to them to respond and to actually get better as a result of what happened in this game. But, the things that we saw happen in this game happened in a larger way than we've seen so far this year. But it wasn't anything that we haven't seen before. Nothing that happened tonight on a play-by-play basis was shocking. I will say this. And I've seen a bunch of folks in the comments bringing up the offensive play calling, and that's going to be talked about.
I was going to go with some shockingness a little bit.
It's going to be talked about a lot this week, and I think particularly up at the goal line. I think you have Brian Robinson running the ball as well as he did in the second half, and you go away from that suddenly near the goal line. It's very perplexing. I suspect that Saban will be coaching his players very hard this week, but I think he might also be coaching some of his assistants this week.
Yes, no question. I always get a hoot out of like former Bama players who are now in the pros tweeting about the games, especially in frustrating situations. And there was some of that, and most of it had to do with run the ball when you're facing, first and goal or whatever it is from the 3 and you pass 3 times. I mean, that's a frustrating situation. Not something that you expect when you have a guy in Brian Robinson who is coming off a 4-touchdown performance and had 147 on the ground, but feed that man the ball, especially down in the red. I mean, he's a huge body that has bulldozed guys down there, Matt.
Yeah, and I think I think the whole offense played better when Brian Robinson started to become more of the focus of the offense. I think it took some of that pressure off of Bryce Young that, look, it was pretty clear he was feeling it in this game. It's pretty clear that I don't know if it was just the atmosphere in the building, if it was all the blitzes that Texas A&M was sending at him all night, combination of those things. Bryce Young did not look comfortable tonight. He did not look confident in this game, but he looked better when Brian Robinson was reeling off 5- and 6-yard runs to open a series every time. And I think, the question that a lot of people will have about this game is, why didn't Alabama, of all the things they did adjust to, and I think they did make some adjustments in the second half that brought them back into this game, but they never really seemed to find that adjustment to put Bryce in a better situation so that he was not having to make as many throws under duress. I mean, I think, look, not to get too deep into the X's and O's part of it, but when the other team blitzes, there's an opportunity for you. And it seemed strange that Texas A&M was having success over and over and over again blitzing. And Alabama never seemed to find where that hot receiver was, where the gap was that was being left open by that blitz.
Yeah.
I don't know and look, I've only watched the game live as it happened. I don't know if it comes down to Bryce Young not seeing things that he should be seeing. And he said that after the game tonight. He said, I need to see the field better. I don't know if it is Bill O'Brien not calling the game differently to put Bryce Young in a better situation to take advantage of what happens when Texas A&M blitzes. But I know that it was a problem that Alabama never really solved tonight. And I think that everybody else is going to try it until Alabama proves they can solve that problem.
A big part of what I think when it comes to that is just the protection. I think that there were moments where he didn't have a lot of time, and I'm not necessarily just putting that all on the offensive line if they're sending a bunch of guys or whatever. But Bryce Young didn't have the type of time that he has had in previous weeks for decision making. And let's not forget the fact that we are now 6 weeks into the season. Jimbo Fisher is a good football coach. He has won a national title. He's done a lot of successful things. He has a bigger, what's the word I'm looking for here? He has more to look at when it comes to film. He has a bigger sample size, the word I'm looking for, when it comes to what has worked against Alabama. So now 6 weeks into the season, he can watch the last 5 games, see what has worked against Alabama, and making Bryce Young work under distress is one of those things. He's a first-year starter, and when there are moments where he is under distress, and you can tell, because this is not a guy who likes to run. We saw Bryce Young run for his life more tonight than we have seen him run since his time at Alabama. That's how I knew things were not pretty early on. I mean, 4 sacks at one point, Alabama was just dominated in the trenches. So for me, I think the offensive line probably didn't really hold up to the standard, but just credit what Jimbo Fisher did too, scheming up what was necessary, what the Aggie staff saw and the sample size they had, to make it happen and to put Bryce Young under distress. I mean, sometimes you just got to tip your hat to game planning by the other side.
It was a great game plan, and I think regardless of what was being thrown at him, ultimately, when you are the starting quarterback, even if you're young, even if you're a first-year starting quarterback, there's not, as you mentioned, there's not a lot of film out there on Bryce Young yet. What's going to happen though here is upcoming opponents are going to watch this game, and they're going to see that this situation made Bryce Young uncomfortable. So he's going to have to learn how to deal with it. Could the protection get better? Could the play calling get better to help him? Absolutely. But they're still going to do it. They're going to start applying more and more pressure to Bryce Young until he proves that that is not a thing that rattles him anymore, that he can succeed in spite of that and play around it and make things happen regardless of having pressure in his face. So look, it's about to be a pretty interesting month for the remainder of October for Alabama. I think you look at what's coming up for these upcoming games, there are not any gimmies in the SEC West for Alabama. There are teams that Alabama definitely should beat and has more talent than. Arkansas, Mississippi State. These are teams that Alabama has a clear talent advantage over. Mm-hmm. But schematically now, there is some film that all of these teams are going to watch, and they're going to say, get in Bryce Young's face, make him uncomfortable, and maybe he'll play like he did against Texas A&M. Yeah. So it's about to be a big moment for Bryce Young in his career, and he's going to have to prove that he is going to play better against that kind of pressure next time than he did tonight.
And another part of this, and we talked about this in the pregame show, although in the pregame show, I really did not think that the crowd was going to have any factor.
Neither of us did.
Alabama was just going to put A&M away very quickly, but this was the second largest crowd ever at Kyle Field, and I have been there for some very crazy games. When you have over 100,000 strong, and you're even in a close game with A&M, add in all the things. I mean, all the things in this game. That is a tough environment for anybody to function. So what a learning experience for the younger guys. Bryce Young, and he's not the only one, but the younger guys on this team, this can only help. And I think you mentioned that Saban said that. I mean, there is so much to learn from this. There's so much to gain from this moving forward that sometimes those are the positives that you have to take away.
Yeah, and I think playing on the road is clearly an issue for this team so far. I mean, we've only got 2 to look at, but they had a really tough time at Florida.
Yeah.
They obviously had a really tough time tonight. Maybe it's not the crowd, maybe it's the opponents just happen to have great games those days, but I think there's reason to have some doubt about this team and their ability to play in a tough environment. So,
Yeah.
you look at what else is ahead. There's a big, giant, intimidating environment at the end of the season, obviously, and that one's going to be looming large. But I know nobody's going to take these 2 names seriously that I'm about to say, but I think you need to consider it. I think you need to start thinking about how Alabama is going to look in games on the road against Mississippi State and Tennessee. Those are 2 places that can be tough atmospheres, and those 2 teams do not look like they're as bad as they were last year. They both look really improved over a year ago. I'll say especially Tennessee. Their offense is kind of putting up scary numbers right now. So, look, it's hard to convince Alabama fans to take Mississippi State and Tennessee seriously. But right now, this team went out and played, I would say, the worst looking half of football that we have seen Alabama play since that 2018 national championship game against Clemson, where they were just basically didn't even show up.
Yeah.
So that should ring alarm bells for Bama fans. And this is a big moment that this team needs to respond to.
Yeah. And speaking of ringing bells, Mississippi State is next week. So that is a tough environment right off the bat. And like you said, I mean, when you're coming off a loss, you can take it one of 2 ways, Matt. You can either thrive, you can move forward from it, you can learn from it, or you can allow another SEC opponent that you got to beat on the road to get you.
No question. And folks calling me out on Tennessee being at home this year, you are correct. I was wrong about that. But look, there are other games on Alabama's schedule this year that are not going to, regardless of the team's ranking. Look, Texas A&M was an unranked team. They lost 2 games already this season. I don't think this really has a lot to do with the opponents in a lot of these cases. I mean, it might be a factor if and when they get to play Georgia, but Alabama doesn't have any layups left on the schedule outside of New Mexico State. Okay. The SEC games left on Alabama's schedule are without exception tough games.
Yes.
They're not games that Alabama will easily win if they play like they did in the first half tonight against Texas A&M. So I think this is a big moment. This is a team that we're going to find out if this is a team that is capable of living up to the Alabama standard and competing for a championship, or if this is a rebuilding year. We all thought we knew what it was going to be a couple of weeks ago, and we found out tonight that we're not quite right about this team yet. And that doesn't mean that tonight is what they're going to look like for the rest of the season, but this needs to be a turning point if this team wants to accomplish something special this year.
No question. Nick Saban said tonight, we can still accomplish what we want to accomplish. And all that is true. The West is still majorly up for grabs. Going in, you can still make a trip to Atlanta. You can still be in the college football playoff. All those things matter. That said, the West is up for grabs. And Matt started the show by saying the margin of error is very, very small. Could not have spoken truer words, Matt. There is no room for error moving forward. Alabama has to finish every single game. At this rate, you dropped 2 losses. I don't think there's ever been a 2-loss team in the playoffs, number one. Number two, you're potentially moving yourself out of contention in the West. And like you said, there's just no room for error. Alabama has to be perfect moving forward. And if anyone can get it right, it's Nick Saban.
We'll see. We will see, Simone. I mean, again, I was so stunned watching this team in the first half tonight. I have to be honest about it. I really did not think that anybody could come out and punch Alabama in the mouth the way that Texas A&M did tonight. And the fact that it was Texas A&M, a team that has really struggled this year,
no question,
I think makes you have to be a little on guard until we see this team start playing dominant football again.
No question. All right, guys, the final from College Station, Texas is 41-38. Texas A&M pulls off a huge upset over the top-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. The positive news, folks, is that it's 12:04 Central Time. It's already a new day. It's a new day. It's time to move forward. Let's all put this to bed. The sun will come up tomorrow and everything will be okay. It's going to be all right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning into the Alabama Postgame Show, brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. For Matt Scalisi, I'm Simone Eli. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of health.